You know, the last few weeks I've been preaching a series called Jesus Too Good Not to Share. If Jesus is really who we say he is, and he's done what we say he has done, then truly that is a true statement. He is too good to keep to ourselves. He's too good for us to keep him a secret. We just have to share it. I heard it this past week, we need to be gossipers like God, gossiping about Jesus like we would with a neighbor over across the backyard fence. I love that picture. I love that image that he's just too good. We can't not share him, and we have to talk. And just kind of like talking with a neighbor across the backyard fence, we just have to share. And so the last 4 weeks, and then next week we're going to conclude it, we've been basically at the cross. We've been looking at the work of Christ on the cross and what that means. He paid our debt. He's too good not to share. He was the adoption price that allowed us to be adopted as sons and daughters of the King. Too good not to share. That he paid the redemption price, which freed us from our being slaves to sin. He's just too good not to share. And this morning we're going to talk about that he is the one who reconciles us back to himself. I have to confess, I am a Survivor fan. The reality TV show now, I just kind of have to, and I just need to know how much I have to explain here. How many of you have a clue what I'm talking about when I say that I am a Survivor fan? Okay, some are like, preacher, stop speaking in tongues. Just speak truth. Just get plain. Just help me understand you. That's what you're saying, right? And so Survivor's a reality show. It's been on for 25 years. The first show was in May of 2000. And they took 18 participants. And they would take them to an island. And used to they would go to different islands and different places in the country. Now they'll just go to Fiji every time. But the first Survivor show was on the island of Borneo. There were 18 contestants. And they would divide them into tribes. And then the tribes would compete. And if you lost the competition, the immunity challenge, then your tribe would go to tribal council. And at tribal council, you had to vote someone on your tribe off the island. And so the tagline is outwit, outlast, outplay. You wanted to be the last man standing. And I don't know what's addictive about it, but I started watching it. And by the way, I missed the first season. I did not get the Borneo season, but I caught the second season, which started in January of 2001, and it was in Australia. And I've caught every season since. By the way, they're in the 50th season now, 25 years. Guess what? I am right in the middle of it, watching every single episode. An addiction? Yeah, probably. It's one of those addictions that I have. But every now and then, they would throw a twist in the game. They would kind of mess it up. And so you wouldn't, from one season to the next, you wouldn't know exactly what would be different, what would be the same, what twists they would add. And so I think it was season 12. Don't hold me to that. But they added a twist called Exile Island. Exile Island. Now, what happened on Exile Island is you would have competitions. You'd have two different types of competitions. You would have reward competitions and then immunity challenges. But the reward competitions, if you were the losers, if you lost the competition, then you would have to vote for someone in your tribe to go to Exile Island. And so the person that was chosen drew the short straw. Sometimes they volunteered. But you would go to Exile Island. They would take you to an island by yourself. And you would have to spend 24 to 48 hours by yourself. All you had was a machete, flint, and water. That's it. Machete, flint, and no shelter, no food. It was just a glorious day in time. So you had to survive Exile Island for 24 to 48 hours. And then eventually, they would allow you to leave Exile Island and go back with your tribe. Now, this is kind of a new twist in the game, this idea of being exiled. And when you were exiled, you were banished from your tribe. And so, yeah, there was no food and there was, yes, water. But more than anything else, there was no one to talk to except yourself. There was no one to weep with, cry. There was no one to celebrate. You were alone. You were isolated. You were alienated. You were on exile island. Now, with that picture, I want to suggest to you that Scripture talks to us about an exile island. We can go all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. God made Adam and Eve, put them in paradise, the Garden of Eden. But in chapter 3 of Genesis, the book of Genesis, Adam and Eve did their own thing. They rebelled, and in doing their own thing, they rebelled against God. And rebelling against God, God says, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to banish you off the island. I'm going to have to banish you out of paradise. And they got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And let's just call that exile island. And by the way, from that point forward, guess where they wanted to go back to? Can we go back to Eden? Can we go back to paradise? Sorry, God, didn't mean it. Eve, the woman you gave me, she ate the fruit. I mean, whatever we have to do. Can I go back? Leave Eve out next. I don't know if Adam said that, but here's what I know. Once they were banished from paradise, guess where they wanted to go back to? Can I get back there? The Israelites. Judah. Judah was two of the 12 tribes, Judah and Benjamin. And they formed a nation. They had 18 kings, but they rebelled against God. Some of the kings were good. If you read through the history, you'll find some of the kings, they did right in the eyes of the Lord. Most of the kings were horrible and bad and evil. In fact, what you'll find is a description of most of the kings is they did evil in the sight of the Lord. And as they did evil in the sight of the Lord, they led the Israelites to do evil, to rebel against God. And God brought prophets to talk to them, Jeremiah and Isaiah. And the prophets would say, turn to God, turn back to God, return to God. But they didn't. They kept rebelling. And so in 586 BC, God sent the Babylonians to come and attack the Judah, the Israelites. And as they attacked Israel or Judah, the Israelites, they beat them. They defeated them. But they took them back with them to Babylon. So the Israelites were now back in Babylon, a foreign country. You know what that time is called in history? Exile. They were exiled. They were banished from home. They were banished from Jerusalem. They were banished from Judah, and they were living in a foreign country in exile. Let's call that exile island. And can I just share with you, you know what they wanted when they were living in exile in Babylon? Can we go back home? Can we go back to the way? God, I'm sorry. Would you forgive me? Can we go back to Jerusalem? I don't really like living in exile. There's another exile I want to talk about, and it's not about Adam and Eve, and it's not about Judah in Babylon, and it's not about a game that's being played on TV. You know, Paul talks about this exile. And the letter that he wrote to the church at Ephesus, Ephesians chapter 2, I want to look at this in verse 11. So then, remember that at one time you were Gentiles in the flesh. So he's talking to the Gentiles, and he says, you were Gentiles in the flesh, called the uncircumcised by those called the circumcised, which is done in the flesh by human hands. Verse 12, at that time you were without Christ, excluded from citizenship of Israel, and foreigners to the covenant of promise, without hope, without God in the world. Now let's just kind of stop right there, because there's a lot in this passage. First of all, Paul says, I'm talking to the Gentiles. And when I'm talking to the Gentiles, let me just describe you as this. You're without God, without Christ. Now, that's not saying without Jesus Christ. Christ is Messiah. Christ in the Greek is Messiah in the Hebrew. And so what he was saying is the Jews had Messiahs come up. Messiah means anointed one. Kings come up. You're without a king. You're without a Messiah. You're without Christ. And you're without... You're excluded from citizenship of Israel, and you're a foreigner to the promise. Now, none of those statements talk about inclusion, does it? None of those statements say you're on the island of paradise. No. Every one of those statements says you're on the outside looking in. You're on the outside. You're without a Messiah. You're without Christ. You're excluded from citizenship of Israel. You're a foreigner to the promise. And then he says, to make it, to kind of drive home the point, you're without hope and you're without God. You're without hope, you're without God. Let's just call this exile island. And Paul's saying to the Gentiles, let's just paint this picture for you, and the picture I want to paint for you, I'm calling it exile island. And by the way, if you were a Jew in the church, if you were a Jew in the day, Paul made it clear you don't have it really much better off than the Gentiles. In fact, look at verse 16. Chapter 2, verse 16 says this, he did this so that he, Christ did this, so that he, Christ, might reconcile both to God in one body. Who's he talking about when he says both? Jew and Gentile. So Jews on Exile Island too, they just had the promise, covenant of promise. They had citizenship of Israel, but they still were without God and they were without hope. And so Paul is saying to the church, to the Gentiles, to the Jews, remember when? Remember when you were on Exile Island? You were estranged from God. You were without hope. You were without God. You were without life. And you were in need of being reconciled. You were in need of being brought back into the fold. You were in need of being brought back into where God was and is. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul says this to the church at Corinth. He says, everything is from God who has reconciled us to himself through Christ. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making his appeal through us, we plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Now, but Paul is saying, your greatest need is to be reconciled back to God. In fact, church, you're ambassadors, you're representatives of the King, and your job, your mission is you're to go tell people, you're to go plead with people, be reconciled back to God. Now, the reason they need to be reconciled back to God is because they're on Exile Island. They are far from God. They are in need of reconciliation. They are in need of hope. They're in need of a God who's in relationship with them. I like the way Paul said it to the church at Colossae. In Colossians chapter 1, it says, once you were alienated and hostile in your minds, expressed in your evil actions, but now he has reconciled you. Once, let's not remember where you once was. You were alienated. And think about that word. You were alienated. You're kind of put off. You're kind of pushed to the ends and to the sides and to exile. And hostile in your mind. I like that visual, being hostile in your mind. You know what? The mind is a powerful thing. And can play tricks on you and can bring discouragement to you. Hostile minds. See, when you're on Exile Island, you think to yourself, is there hope? Where is there hope? God, do you care? How do I know if you care? God, is there a tomorrow with purpose? Because right now I don't see purpose. See, on Exile Island, the mind can play just crazy things on you and will tell you there's no hope, there's no way out, there's no purpose. And the reason I think our mind does that to us is because in us, deep inside of us, we have something in us that we know there's life with purpose. We know there's life with hope. We know there's life with God. We just know it's not on Exile Island. See, Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 says it this way. He's also put eternity in your heart. There's something inside of you that God has put in you that you know when you're on exile, when you're estranged from God, when you're far from God, you know it's not supposed to be this way. Something should be different than this. What is that that's telling you that? Well, I believe God's put it in your heart that you long for him. You long to... Now, your life might not say you're longing for him. Your words might not even say you're longing for him. But inside of all of us, I believe there's something inside of us. We know we know there's got to be something different than exile. Can I go back to Survivor one last time? One of the twists they brought in was called Redemption Island. Redemption Island. And on 3 different occasions, 3 different seasons, they brought this in. Now, what happened on Redemption Island is if you got voted out, so you're at tribal council, and your tribe says, you're done, your game is over, and you would bring your torch up, and Jeff would snuff out your torch, and you would go off. And then now, normally you're out of the game. You're either going home or you're on the jury, but you can't win. There's no chance of you winning if you get your torch snuffed out. But on these seasons, with Redemption Island, if you got your torch snuffed out, you didn't go home and you weren't on the jury, you went to an island called Redemption Island. And you stayed there until the next person got voted out. Now, when the next person got voted out, they went to Redemption Island. So now there's 2 on Redemption Island. And those 2 would have a duel. They would have a competition. They would go one-on-one, mano-a-mano. Winner stayed on Redemption Island. Loser went home. And they would do this until the time came that whoever was on Redemption Island would be able to come back into the game. Now, there's a guy named Ozzy. And Ozzy, he's the boss, man. He is just an outstanding player because on Redemption Island, he won 6 duels, 5 of them in a row. Now, how do you last duel after duel, competition after competition? He came back into the games on 2 different occasions because he was king of Redemption Island. You know what I think? I think we think the exile I'm talking about, the exile that Paul talks about, I think we think that we would be able to get back in the game on our own. I think the world thinks that. If I just win enough competitions, if I just beat the next person, if I'm just better than the next person, I'll get back in. If I'm just good enough. And if I'm good enough, then maybe God will let me leave exile and go back into paradise. I think there's a lot of people out there, and they're living life with that mentality. If I'm just good enough, if I can just be better than the next person. Don't we do that? Don't we have this mentality? And I think we struggle with this as Christians. Well, God, I know I'm not perfect, but have you seen Joe? I'm not as bad as Joe. Jill, I got it better than Jill. And God, if you're grading on the curve, I get it if Joe's not going to make it. I get it if Jill's not going to make it, but God, I'm better than them. And so, surely, God, you're going to let me leave exile and get back with you. I just think that's kind of part of our culture. Bad news. You can't earn your way off of exile island. You might be better than Joe, but being better than Joe is not going to get you off exile island. And so as we come to the bad news, we need to understand the bad news because the bad news is important. Important, first of all, because we need to understand you can't get off of exile island and back with God on your own. As good as you can be, you're just not that good. As good as I am, which is debatable, I'm just not that good. You can't get off of exile line. We need to understand the bad news fully because the bad news tells us you're exiled, you're estranged from God, you're far from God, and you can't get back to God by your goodness, by your effort, by your work. But we also need to understand bad news because when we understand the bad news, then we understand the good news that's next. And the good news is Christ went to Redemption Island for you. Christ went to Redemption Island so you can defeat the evil one. If you go toe-to-toe with the evil one, you're going to lose every time. You don't have a chance. You don't have a chance of ever beating the evil one. Why? Because you ain't the evil one, and the evil one's going to beat you. But Christ? Christ went to Redemption Island, and guess what? He went toe-to-toe, mano-a-mano with the evil one. And this week, we're going to walk to the cross, and the cross was the battle. The cross was the showdown, the duel at Calvary. And Christ took every blow Satan could throw at him. Every wound, every piercing, every beating, every thorn. And he's on the cross. He says, "It is finished," and he breathed his last, and he died. Now, from the outside looking in, you might think he lost the battle. You might think that he just was defeated by Satan. Sure looks that way. He's no longer breathing. Satan's still roaming. He's no longer alive, Jesus, that is. Breath is gone. Body is dead. He lost. Oh, but don't be mistaken. Because the cross and the death was needed for redemption. The cross and the death was needed for getting off of Exile Island, for being reconciled back to God. Oh, but 3 days later, he lets us know he didn't lose. He lets us know that he's the victor. He lets us know that he won the battle. He won the duel when the tomb was empty. And he was raised from the dead. See, Christ is the victorious one on Redemption Island. And he didn't have to go to Redemption Island because he was never exiled. He went to Redemption Island because you and I were exiled. And he went to duel with the evil one to defeat the evil one because you and I were exiled. Not that he needed it, you needed it, I needed it, we needed it. He didn't die because he needed to for him, but for you he did. He wasn't buried for him. No, he's buried for you. He wasn't raised from death for him. No. It's for us. And because he went to Redemption Island, and because he fought the evil one, and because he won, he now extends an invitation to every one of us who's on exile. Every one of us who's excluded from God. Every one of us who's on the outside looking in. Every one of us who's a foreigner. Every one of us who's lost. He gives an invitation. And he says, you don't have to stay where you are. You don't have to stay on exile. You can come home. You can come to Redemption Island. You can come to paradise. You would think, you would think maybe those who said yes to the invitation, those who said, okay, I want to leave Exile Island, I want to come into a relationship with you, I want to be reconciled back to you. You would think maybe that those that said yes to the invitation, those that were reconciled back to God, those that were able to leave Exile Island and go back to be with God in paradise, you would think maybe God would say, you're back home, yes, but you're on probation. That's what I would do. I mean, you kick me and you rebel against me and you snub your nose at me. You can come back, but you can come back on probation. And one small chance of messing up, I'm going to kick you back to exile. That's probably my approach, but not God. And there's a story in Luke chapter 15 that shows us how God receives us back. It's a father and two sons. And the youngest son goes to his father and says, Dad, I want my inheritance now. In other words, he's saying, Dad, I want you dead. Because you only would get your inheritance if your father died. But he didn't say, I don't want it when you die. I want it now. So, Dad, I want you basically, you're as good as dead to me. And so the father said, okay. And gave his youngest son the inheritance that should have been his maybe when he died, but was his now because the son said, I'll give it to you. And so the son goes into the far country and squanders it on wild living. The younger son goes to Exile Island, is where he goes. And he's on Exile Island, and he's eating with the pigs, and he says to himself one day, "Self, you're stupid staying here. My dad's servants are treated better than me. I wonder if my dad would treat me as a servant." Definitely not going to ask to be treated as a son. Those days are gone. So he gets himself up, and he goes back to his dad. And what's interesting is the father has been looking for him in the distance every day. And on this day, he looks and he sees his son coming in from the distance. And so what does the father do? The father says, "My son's coming home." And he runs to him. Now, if you understand, running in that culture was just embarrassing. It was improper. And the father was like, "I don't care about proper and improper. I'm going to my son who's coming home." And he runs to his son. And his youngest son starts to give us an excuse to say, "Dad, I'm sorry, shouldn't have done it. I know I'm not going to be accepted as a son. Could you treat me as one of your servants?" But he didn't even get the story out. And the father says, "Welcome home." He brings the robe, and he puts the robe on, and he brings the ring. He kills a fatted calf. Now, the older brother has a problem with this. See, the older brother is someone who says, "Dad, that's okay, but put him on probation. Treat him as a servant. Give him a chance, but only one chance, and kick him out if he messes up again." That's what the older brother wanted. But God, the father says, No. My son was on exile, but he's home. We see God as friend. The cross paves the way for reconciliation to happen, that those who are far from God, who are on Exile Island, can come back into a relationship with God in paradise, and not on probation, and not as a second-class citizen, and not as a servant, but as a child and as a friend. The question to you: do you know God as friend? Father, we thank you. We thank you that you are the God who reconciles us back to you. We don't deserve it. We haven't earned it. In fact, we probably should be treated as second-class citizens and servants. But you show love and grace, and you receive us back as sons and as daughters of the King. So we say thank you. You're too good for us not to share. Amen. It's in Christ's name I pray.